Welcome to our channel. We're so glad you're here. Today, we have a special story that will take you on an unforgettable journey. As you watch, we'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let us know. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the exciting tales we have lined up for you. Make sure to come back tomorrow for another story that will captivate your imagination. Your feedback means the world to us, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. The Paparazzo's Fall. What happened when fame took a dark turn? Jake Martin, once a titan in the world of paparazzi photography, had built his career capturing the unguarded moments of the rich and famous. For nearly 2 decades, his camera had been a powerful tool, turning fleeting scandals into front-page gold. He was the man photographers feared and envied, his name synonymous with breaking headlines. One of his most iconic shots, a duchess, caught in a private moment with her bodyguard, earned him a 6-figure payday. Another tearful celebrity breakdown outside a rehab clinic funded his luxurious flat in Chelsea, London. His phone was constantly ringing with editors eager to get their hands on the next explosive image that would set the world on fire. In his prime, Jake was unstoppable, a predator in the jungle of celebrity journalism. But times had changed. By 2025, at the age of 43, Jake found himself a relic of a fading era. Smartphones and social media had stripped the exclusivity from scandalous moments. Now, anyone with a phone could snap a photo and upload it to the internet, making the work of professional photographers feel obsolete. While Jake had once thrived on breaking major stories, 3 younger, hungrier photographers now outpaced him, capturing the attention of the same celebrities with their slick modern gear. Their fast-paced approach left Jake feeling slow, outdated, and irrelevant. His editor at the Daily Expo, who had once eagerly awaited his photos, now dismissed his submissions with sharp critiques. The work that had once earned Jake respect now lacked the impact it once commanded. The younger, more technologically savvy photographers had left him in the dust. Back in the day, his well-known bulky Canon camera was a symbol of his dominance. Now it was nothing more than a reminder of his decline. His once top-tier gear now felt like an anachronism in a world that moved faster than he could keep up with. Jake's financial situation mirrored his professional struggles. Rent was 2 months overdue, and his savings were rapidly depleting. The money he once earned from his images that had catapulted him to the heights of celebrity gossip, had dried up. Even the publications that had paid him handsomely for his shots now offered him only pennies. They cited market conditions, which had shifted dramatically. Desperation gnawed at Jake, and he could feel the walls closing in. His dream of a lavish career in the spotlight had turned into a nightmare of irrelevance and mounting debts. In the face of these challenges, Jake felt cornered. He needed a spectacular shot, a shot that would put him back on top, a shot that would silence the mockery of younger rivals who had overtaken him. He needed something that would prove he was still capable of capturing the story of the moment, something that would make editors and the public remember who Jake Martin was. And then, fate presented him with an opportunity. It was a crisp morning, in April 2025, when Jake stood among a group of photographers outside Buckingham Palace, ready to stake everything on a single shot. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, as word spread that a royal motorcade was approaching. Rumors swirled that it might carry an American diplomat, a guest whose presence could spark headlines, especially amid tense relations between the US and the UK. For Jake, this was his moment. A chance for redemption, a chance to reclaim his place in the world of celebrity journalism. But there was one obstacle in his way: the Queen's Guard. Sergeant Brad Coleman, a figure in scarlet and black, stood like a statue, his bearskin cap and ceremonial rifle marking him as an immovable fixture at his post. To Jake, Coleman was nothing more than a nuisance, an obstacle blocking the perfect angle for his shot. Ignoring the warnings from a palace liaison to step back, Jake edged closer. His coffee-stained jacket hung loosely, a faded badge of honor from his days of dominance. The motorcade approached and Jake's frustration bubbled over. With years of declining fortunes and mounting pressure on his shoulders, Jake snapped. He lunged forward, driving his shoulder into Coleman with enough force to jolt him from his stance. The crowd gasped. Tourists froze, their phones mid-air. Fellow photographers lowered their lenses in disbelief. But Jake didn't care. In that moment, he seized what he thought was his only chance for a comeback. His camera clicked furiously, capturing the diplomat's startled expression as he emerged from the car. Jake whispered to himself, "Got you." A grim smile spread across his face. The shots were perfect, intimate, unguarded, everything his, editor demanded. But just as quickly as his fleeting triumph had come, the consequences began to unfold. Jake hadn't realized it yet, but he had crossed a line that would change everything. As the final shot clicked in rapid succession, the crowd around Buckingham Palace held its breath. The perfect photo, the one Jake Martin had longed, or was now in his hands. For a split second, he felt the rush of victory flood his veins. This would be the photo that would put him back on top, the shot that would prove he still had it, that he could still make a name for himself in the ever-changing world of celebrity photography. He imagined the headlines now, the money pouring, and as editors scrambled to print his images across the tabloids. But just as Jake started to savor his small triumph, the reality of the moment hit him like a cold splash of water. The crowd's hushed silence, followed by the sharp intake of breath from those around him, made it clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The gasps didn't come from the American diplomat, the one Jake had hoped to capture. No, they were for something far more significant, something Jake hadn't even considered when he shoved Sergeant Brad Coleman. Jake turned just in time to see the Queen's Guard, once jostled from his post, now standing tall and unflinching. The guard's eyes were locked ahead, his face expressionless, his discipline unbroken. His posture was calm, but there was a palpable tension in the air. It wasn't anger, nor was it fear. It was something far stronger. Dignity. Jake's heart began to race as he realized what had just transpired. His reckless action, his disregard for the soldier's position, had crossed a line he hadn't fully understood. The tourists, once excited to witness the grandeur of Buckingham Palace, now stood frozen, phones dangling limply in their hands. What had started as a light-hearted moment of spectacle quickly morphed into something far more serious. People who had been casually snapping photos just moments earlier now exchanged uncertain glances, sensing that they had witnessed something far beyond a mere scuffle between a photographer and a guard. Jake's camera hung heavy in his hands, the reality of the consequences weighing down on him. His bravado, his sense of invincibility, quickly crumbled as he realized what he had done. The perfect shot that had promised to save his career now felt like a hollow victory, a Pyrrhic one, at best. As the air thickened with tension, Jake began to feel the eyes of the crowd, not on the image he had just captured, but on him. The weight of his actions, the disrespect he had shown to someone who represented far more than he had ever considered, was sinking in. And then Sergeant Brad Coleman spoke. His voice cut through the growing tension, sharp and unwavering. Jake could feel the guard's words settle over him like a heavy cloak. "I am Sergeant Brad Coleman of the Grenadier Guards," he said, his tone firm but measured. "Before this post, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan's Helmand province and 1 in Iraq." The words rang out in the stillness of the crowd. "My uniform is not a costume, and my duty is not a performance." Jake's eyes widened, and a lump formed in his throat as the guard continued. He spoke of the battle-hardened experiences that had shaped his service, of comrades who had not returned from the front lines. "The bearskin cap I wear," Coleman said, "is a symbol of battles fought and brothers lost. It's not just a hat, it's history." For the first time, Jake felt a sting in his chest, a pang of guilt that shot through him like a bolt of lightning. The realization hit harder than any critique or mockery he had received over the years. This wasn't just a ceremonial guard standing motionless for tourists. This was a man who, had served in war, who had faced life-or-death situations, and who had come home scarred by experiences most people could never fathom. His uniform, his role, had meaning. It wasn't a costume, nor a joke. It was something Jake had dismissed without a second thought. The crowd, too, seemed to shift. The American tourists who had been laughing and joking before now fell silent, their smiles replaced by expressions of respect. The energy in the air had changed, and so had the tone of the situation. The photographer who had once been the focus of the crowd's attention was now a man humbled, his camera hanging limply at his side. The younger photographers who had once watched Jake with envy no longer sneered at him. Instead, they exchanged glances, and a few of them stepped forward to apologize to Coleman on behalf of their trade. Jake's victory, so hard-fought and fleeting, was gone. His press credentials, once his ticket to the world of celebrity gossip, were permanently revoked. The Royal Press Association would receive a full report, and Jake's reputation would be shredded beyond repair. His career, built on capturing the lives of the rich and famous, now stood on the edge of an irreversible collapse. As security closed in, Jake realized the enormity of what he had just lost. Not just his career, but the respect of his peers, the public, and perhaps most importantly, his own self-respect. The photos he had taken, once poised to make him relevant again, would instead be the images of his disgrace. The humiliation stung worse than any rejection he had faced in his years as a photographer. The silence that followed Sergeant Brad Coleman's words seemed to stretch on forever, pressing down on Jake like an unbearable weight. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline from his earlier rush of victory now replaced by the cold sting of regret. Jake's camera felt like a dead weight in his hands as he stared at the guard, whose disciplined presence now seemed to tower over him. The crowd, once captivated by Jake's every move, now looked at him with a mix of disbelief and contempt. He could feel the shift in the air, the change in the perception of the situation. What had started as a simple photo op had evolved into a moment of reckoning, one that Jake wasn't prepared for. Sergeant Coleman's calm, unwavering voice continued to cut through the thickening tension. "I've been in situations where life and death were separated by mere seconds," he said, his words measured yet firm. "I've stood still for hours, watched my comrades fall beside me and carried the weight of their sacrifice. You think this is just a uniform, a performance for tourists? You couldn't be further from the truth." Jake's gaze faltered as he listened, the weight of the soldier's words sinking in deeper with each passing second. The guard's eyes were locked on him, steady and unblinking, as though daring Jake to challenge the gravity of what he had just said. But Jake couldn't find the words. His bravado had evaporated, replaced by a deep sense of shame that burned in his chest. The crowd, once filled with light-hearted excitement, now shifted in their stance. The tourists who had been snapping selfies, unaware of the deeper significance of the Queen's Guard, now stood in quiet reverence. Even the younger photographers, who had once looked up to Jake as a leader in the industry, were now standing back, watching the unfolding moment with a new sense of understanding. A few of them, who had previously laughed at Jake's outdated equipment, now seemed to recognize the truth of the situation. "Do you even know what this uniform represents?" Sergeant Coleman continued, his voice steady. "This is not just a costume, it's a legacy, a history of sacrifice. The bear skin cap I wear, it's been worn since the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, where British soldiers stood against Napoleon's elite troops. Every soldier who has worn this uniform has paid a price for it, and I've lost brothers in arms who can never wear it again." The words were like a punch to Jake's gut. The history, the sacrifice, the pride, all of it had been reduced to a mere inconvenience in his pursuit of the perfect shot. He had dismissed Coleman as nothing more than a prop, a figure to be moved out of the way for his perfect angle. But now, as the guard spoke of his tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, of the comrades he had lost, Jake realized just how deeply he had misunderstood the world he had been exploiting for so long. A sudden wave of nausea swept over him, and Jake felt his knees weaken beneath him. The image he had once believed would save his career now seemed trivial, insignificant compared to the profound weight of what he had just learned. The photographs, the scandalous shots he had spent his career chasing, suddenly felt hollow. They no longer held the same power they once did. As Jake stood there, rooted to the spot, the weight of his actions began to crush him. The quiet hum of the crowd faded into the background, drowned out by the deafening realization that he had crossed a line that no career comeback could erase. His shame deepened as he caught the eyes of the onlookers, their expressions, now filled with something he hadn't expected: respect for Sergeant Coleman and pity for him. The guard's voice grew softer, but no less impactful. "What you did wasn't just disrespectful to me. It was disrespectful to every soldier who's ever worn this uniform. It was disrespectful to those who fought for the freedoms you take for granted." Jake could feel the eyes of the younger photographers. On him, their looks now filled with something far different than the envy they once held. They were no longer admiring his skill or his boldness. Instead, they seemed to pity him. One by one, they stepped forward, not to mock him, but to apologize to Sergeant Coleman on behalf of their craft. It was a silent gesture, but it spoke volumes. Jake's world, which had once been centered around the pursuit of fame, fortune, and the next big story, now felt small, insignificant. His camera, once a tool of power and influence, now felt like a burden he could no longer bear. The incident had gone from a chance for redemption to a humiliating fall from grace. As security closed in, the finality of the moment hit him like a cold slap to the face. His press credentials, once his ticket to the world of tabloid journalism, were revoked. No more access to royal events, no more scoops, no more fame. And as the security guards led him away, Jake realized that the very thing he had spent his career chasing, the spotlight, had now turned on him, exposing everything he had ignored, every mistake he had made. The story Jake Martin would now become part of was not one of celebrity scandals or triumph. It was a story of humility, of learning too late that some things are not meant to be exploited. It was a lesson about respect, sacrifice, and the consequences of crossing a line that should never have been crossed. And as he was escorted away, he knew that the real story of the day, the one that would be remembered, wasn't captured through his lens. It was the story of Sergeant Brad Coleman's dignity and sacrifice, a story that Jake had failed to understand until it was far too late. The weight of Sergeant Brad Coleman's words hung heavily in the air, and Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he stood there, rooted to the spot. Every moment that passed felt like an eternity. The crowd had gone from shocked silence to a hushed reverence, their attention now fully focused on the guard in front of him. Jake's camera, once his lifeline, now felt like a burden in his hands, a reminder of the recklessness that had just sealed his fate. The realization hit him harder than any rejection or critique he had ever faced in his career. This was no longer about capturing the perfect scandalous shot to climb back to the top of the paparazzi food chain. It wasn't about showing the world that he still had the edge, that he was still relevant. This moment, this public reckoning, had exposed something far deeper, something Jake had never considered. He had just disrespected not just a soldier, but a man who had paid the price for the freedoms he took for granted. A man whose sacrifices were woven into the fabric of history, a man who had stood tall in the face of unimaginable hardship, yet had remained steadfast at his post. Jake's thoughts raced as the magnitude of what he had done began to sink in. How had he been so blind? He had spent his entire career exploiting the personal lives of others, reducing them to nothing more than fleeting moments captured through the lens of his camera. But now, standing before a man whose service had been marked by real-life sacrifice, Jake realized how hollow and shallow his own pursuit had been. His career, his fame, his so-called glory, none of it mattered anymore. Not in the face of what Sergeant Coleman represented. The sound of security approaching snapped Jake back to reality. He could hear the murmurs of the crowd, the disapproving glances from the tourists who had once been entertained by the spectacle of his career. The once coveted shots, The ones that had brought him so much money and attention now felt utterly meaningless. The world around him had changed in an instant. He was no longer the man with the power to capture the latest scandal. He was a man whose actions had irrevocably tarnished his reputation. His press credentials, the golden ticket to the world he had once ruled, were now hanging by a thread. As security moved closer, the full weight of the situation began to settle in. Jake could feel the eyes of the younger photographers on him. Those who had once looked up to him, admired his work, and perhaps even envied his boldness. But now they weren't admiring him. They weren't even mocking him. They were watching him with something far worse: pity. It was a feeling that cut deeper than any criticism or scorn ever could. He could almost hear the unspoken judgment in their eyes as they glanced at him, their respect for him slipping away like sand through his fingers. Then, in an unexpected move, some of them stepped forward. Not to gloat, not to take advantage of his fall, but to apologize. They were young, eager photographers who had once aspired to his level of success. But now, they were stepping up to do something that Jake never expected. They were apologizing to Sergeant Coleman on behalf of the entire paparazzi industry. The gesture was silent, but it spoke volumes. It was as if they were acknowledging that the world they had been chasing, one of exploitation and sensationalism, had finally come crashing down. And in its place, they recognized the value of something much more important: respect. The realization stung. The very people who had once looked up to him were now disavowing his actions, distancing themselves from the kind of journalism he had practiced. The young photographers understood something Jake hadn't fully grasped until this very moment. They saw the importance of duty, of honoring the people they photographed, not exploiting them for personal gain. They understood that the true value of a story was not in the scandal it created, but in the dignity it preserved. As Jake was led away by security, his thoughts were a jumbled mess of guilt, shame, and disbelief. His life, his career, had been built on a foundation of shallow moments and quick triumphs. But now, all of that had crumbled. The photos that he had taken, once seen as his ticket back to relevance, would now be remembered for all the wrong reasons. They wouldn't be celebrated for the scandal they captured. They would be remembered as the images of his downfall, the photos that marked the end of his career. The sound of the security officers' radios crackled in his ears, but it all felt distant, like the fading echo of a life that was slipping away. The younger photographers who had once idolized him now stepped back, their camera lenses trained not on him, but on Sergeant Coleman. It was as though they had finally realized the truth that Jake had spent years ignoring. There was far more to a story than the fleeting moment of scandal. There was dignity, there was history, there was respect, and those were the things that mattered in the end. As the gates of Buckingham Palace loomed before him, Jake understood that his fall from grace was not just about losing his job, but about losing his place in a world that valued respect over sensation. His career was over, but the lessons he had learned that day, the hard way, would remain with him forever. As Jake was escorted out of the gates of Buckingham Palace, the weight of the moment crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He had always believed that a perfect shot was worth anything, that capturing the right moment, no matter the cost, would be the key to his success. But now, with his press credentials revoked and his career hanging by a thread, Jake understood just how wrong he had been. The streets outside the palace felt like a distant memory of his former life, each step he took away from the grounds marking the irreversible end of an era. The young photographers, once his competition, now watched him with a mixture of pity and disbelief. They had seen his downfall, witnessed his reckless disregard for something far more valuable than the fleeting fame he sought. Jake's own fall from grace had become a public spectacle, one that no amount of scandalous photos could undo. His once untouchable position in the world of celebrity journalism had vanished, replaced by a lingering sense of humiliation that burned in his chest. The crowd around him seemed to sense the shift in the air as well. The tourists who had gathered, earlier amused by the spectacle of Buckingham Palace and the Queen's Guard, now looked at Jake with a new understanding. The joke was no longer on the soldiers in ceremonial uniform, but on the man who had thought he could take advantage of them for personal gain. They saw him for what he had become, a fallen figure who had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. What started as a simple photo op had spiraled into a profound moment of self-realization. Jake had spent years chasing the high of the next big shot, the next explosive headline. He had lived for the adrenaline of capturing the private moments of the rich and famous. But in that single moment at Buckingham Palace, everything he had ever worked for had unraveled. His ambition, once his driving force, now seemed like a hollow pursuit. He had crossed a line, not just professionally, but morally. The perfect shot he had dreamed of, the one he thought would bring him redemption, now stood as a symbol of everything he had gotten wrong. As he was led further away from the palace, Jake's thoughts turned inward. He thought about the countless photos he had taken over the years, shots of celebrities in their most vulnerable moments, their lowest points. He had turned their pain, their struggles, into his success. But now, as he walked through the gates of Buckingham Palace, he couldn't help but wonder what those moments had really meant. What had he sacrificed to get those shots? What had he lost in the process? The apology from the younger photographers still echoed in his mind. They had stepped forward, not to gloat, but to disown him, to show their respect for Sergeant Coleman and what he represented. The gesture had been simple, yet it carried more weight than any of the photographs Jake had ever taken. These photographers, the ones who had once been intimidated by his dominance in the field, now seemed to understand something Jake hadn't grasped for years. There was more to their job than capturing scandal. They realized that the people they photographed weren't just subjects to exploit. They were individuals with their own stories, their own dignity, their own worth. Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder that the world outside of the palace still existed. His editor's name flashed across the screen, but Jake didn't answer. He knew that no call, no message could fix what had just happened. The career he had built on capturing the lives of others was gone, and no amount of pleading could bring it back. He had burned every bridge, and now there was no way to undo the damage. The walk to the exit seemed endless. Each step felt heavier than the last, a reminder that there was no going back. The younger photographers who had once envied him were now turning their lenses away from him, focusing instead on the dignity of the guard, who had stood tall in the face of disrespect. Jake had been outpaced, not just by younger talent, but by a deeper understanding of the world around him. As he passed through the gates of Buckingham Palace, the reality of his fall was undeniable. The headlines would soon be filled with his disgrace, with the image of a seasoned photographer brought low by his own arrogance. But what would stay with him long after the headlines faded was the lesson he had learned too late. Respect, duty, and sacrifice were worth far more than the fleeting moments of scandal he had once sought to exploit. Jake had always believed that fame was the ultimate prize, but as he walked away from Buckingham Palace, he understood that true worth didn't lie in capturing the next big story. It lay in understanding the value of the people around him, in seeing them for who they truly were, and in honoring the sacrifices they had made. It was a lesson that would stay with him long after his career had ended. A lesson learned in the most painful way possible. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's story. What do you think about the choices Jake made and the lesson he learned the hard way? It's easy to get caught up in the chase for fame, success, and that perfect moment, but sometimes we overlook the real cost behind it all. What's your perspective on the way Jake treated the people around him and how it led to his downfall? Do you think respect for others is sometimes sacrificed in the pursuit of career or fame? How can we strike a balance between ambition and honor in our own lives? Let us know in the comments. Your thoughts really matter to us. We want to create a space where we can all learn from the stories we share. Whether you agree or disagree with Jake's actions, we're excited to hear what you think and how it made you feel. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Stay updated on more of our upcoming stories. Your feedback is what helps us grow, and we look forward to reading your comments and engaging with you in the conversation. Thanks for being a part of our community.